They sold a dream of justice while, off-camera, guarding safe white spaces and closed doors. This film isn't about demonizing stars, it's about the machinery of an industry where image often diverged from deeds. Media and studios set the frame. Who was desirable on air? Who got the microphone? How editing smoothed discomfort. Our story's MacGuffin is the Tonight Show guest chair. A pass to fame, a ticket to a second life, a barometer of whom America was ready to hear. We speak carefully, criticize decisions, cautious language, and contemporaries who noted how normal could mask exclusion. We question the legacy rather than hand down verdicts. The promise is 8 episodes where starlight and the system's shadow collide head-on. 1939 recalls the triumph of hierarchies. 1941 the caricatures and fear. 1962 the myth of manhood. 1971 what was said out loud. 1973 a public refusal to play by the rules. This is a frank talk about the price of a beautiful legend. Our path runs from poster smiles to the invisible ledger of access. We begin with the chair that could make a career, and with those it barely let in. Johnny Carson, the chair that stayed closed. One chair could change a life or remain a closed door. Around Johnny Carson, that chair became a passport into the larger culture. According to contemporaneous recollections and criticism, the format favored white space for a conservative audience. The rare appearances of Sammy Davis Jr. felt like an event, while invitations for black performers generally remained limited. In 1965, the name of Nina Simone was allegedly crossed out with the note, "Too political," which neatly explains the invisible boundaries. World-class music, but a risk of awkward questions in prime time. Exceptions prove the rule. Richard Pryor and Eddie Murphy surface as dazzling guests, yet in the same optics as carefully rationed boldness aligned with the show's image. Documents of the era and newspaper columns sketch a familiar scene: the smiling host, a warm chat, applause, and participation statistics that speak for themselves. If a handshake on air soothed the audience, whom did it keep outside the door? Answers arrive in the next episode. The next figure didn't mask his views. He put them into print. And there, the quotations became a manifesto of an era in which fame made peace with exclusion and fear. John Wayne, when the Duke spoke out loud, sometimes the mask doesn't fall, it's simply taken off. In 1971, he gave an interview in which, as reported in the press, he spoke openly about white superiority, justified violence in settler expansion, and argued against equal rights. A stance historians would later parse line by line. The interview also shows the scale of the figure, a national emblem of cowboy heroism with an Oscar for True Grit, 1969, a man whose influence endured up to 1979, when his life ended, but the debate over his legacy did not. There was participation in campaigns against left figures, pressure on directors and producers, and conflicts around Stanley Kramer's films. Elsewhere, the name Paul Robeson appears as a counterpoint to a world where the right to speak was allocated by rank. He invoked traditional values as a justification for hierarchy, shifting the dispute from ethics into politics. That was the program. Historians noted that this frankness wasn't a slip. It looked like a programmatic statement by a star whose reputation set the tone for millions of viewers. Can one be a national hero and simultaneously deny equality? Next comes a gentleman on screen, but in private speech, a different word was used. Clark Gable. Charm versus the N-word. Sometimes, a single word shatters an image more than any scandal. Around Clark Gable there formed a steady image of a gentleman: the suits, the restrained manner, the respect for partners on camera. His connection to Gone with the Wind, 1939, only intensified that aura. Premieres, ovations, the first award for Hattie McDaniel, and the feeling of big history. But in recollections and notes of the time, episodes of private language surface. The word itself, jokes within the circle, at odds with the public picture. At the same time, there were visible gestures against segregation on set. He could object to separating signs, insist on respect for colleagues. The contrast was sharp: praise in the theater and barbed remarks at parties, principled conduct before the camera, and a habit of speaking differently behind the scenes. On this story's map are Culver City, studio gates, and corridors of power where whispers sometimes sounded louder than protocol. Here, the mask didn't fall. It split at the seams, showing how easily the era hid a downward staircase beneath the carpet of etiquette. If he protested bathroom signs, why did boundaries remain in private talk? And the next idol, the voice of kindness on screen, was not shy about sharpness on set. James Stewart, America's good man and the line on set. Sometimes an idol's silence is louder than a shout. In 1962, he entered legend through The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance, with the athletic, imposing Woody Strode at his side. According to participants and the press, the boundaries for the black hero were drawn so the myth of white manhood wouldn't crack. The presence is noticeable, but the line is not crossed. In early 1970s sitcoms, similar characters sometimes simply vanished from a season, as if the edit decided who would remain background. Add to this friendship and deferential visits to J. Edgar Hoover, a symbol of an era in which conservative safety was treated as the highest virtue, and you get a portrait of a good man who protects order even when that order erases someone. We are not claiming more than the record shows. This is a viewer's inference from testimonies and newspaper columns of the time. Who was the good father off camera, and who disappeared from the frame because of it? Next comes a hero of bluntness, whose lines struck another minority. According to colleagues, the very line on set felt like an invisible barrier. Politeness existed, equal space did not. That is how the habit of the era worked. Gary Cooper. Integrity versus anti-Semitic obsessions. Cinema saved towns, while the backrooms pushed people away. Gary Cooper's image was built on a calm, almost schoolboy honesty. The man who arrives, keeps his word, and leaves without flourish. Yet testimonies and memoirs recall the familiar 1940s-1950s talk about Jewish influence in the industry, where success was explained by background rather than talent. His involvement with HUAC in the late 1940s and early 1950s is often linked to the legitimization of cleansing. As suspicion became normal, the presence of wrong names in the credits seemed a threat. In that atmosphere, fear worked like editing. Some scenes were cut, some careers put on hold. The paradox of the image only deepened. On screen, principle without a trace of fanaticism. Off screen, conversations in which Ben Hecht and Clifford Odets became symbols of outside influence. Historians and critics have noted that such modulations of tone were not exceptions of the era, but its quiet grammar. In that context, public politeness coexisted easily with private hierarchy, fixing invisible barriers for a long time. And it felt reasonable. Can one play honesty while feeding exclusion at the same time? Next chapter, the iconic image of the South, and a silence that speaks for itself. Vivien Leigh, Scarlett's shadow. When role and reality merge, who gets hurt? Around Vivien Leigh and her Scarlett, the myth shone flawlessly, while beneath it lay a staircase not everyone could climb. The 1939 Atlanta premiere came with a parade of rapture, accounts note disregard toward black actors, and the discomfort of those who weren't admitted to the right hall. Hattie McDaniel's name was toasted, but, as was recounted in diary notes, the rules of hospitality worked selectively. The 1940 London screening left a trace in a diary, allegedly. The writer caught himself applauding while feeling a slow unease at images that blended sentimentality with hierarchy. After the war, criticism of these images grew louder. Leigh herself, by many accounts, preferred silence, dissolving sharp questions into professional discipline and the legend of a difficult role. Thus emerges Scarlett's shadow, a role that grants eternal fame, and a reality where places and doors are clearly marked. Read through diaries and memoir echoes, this feels less like an accusation than a symptom of a system sure of itself. If cinema is a mirror of its era, why did it so easily fix the staircase downward? The answer isn't obvious, but the question grows louder today, and now an icon of independence who had her own red line. Katharine Hepburn, freedom with boundaries. A symbol of freedom can build walls. After the shock of Pearl Harbor in 1941, even the most independent stars voiced hard formulas. Publications and testimonies repeated a stance: not to work with Japanese. A note of principle turned into practice. A refusal of a Broadway contract because the company included Japanese-American actors. Newspaper clippings mentioned the Los Angeles Herald-Examiner. The language of headlines made the position clear without extra explanation. On screen, there was wit and steel, on-stage discipline and high standards, but behind them emerged boundaries drawn by surnames. In later years, silence prevailed. Memoirs sidestepped the crucial words, and interviews reduced everything to the legend of professional independence. This does not cancel the power of talent. It adds a contour that cannot be ignored. When freedom is declared as absolute, it is crucial to ask upon whom it closes. Viewers see the role. Colleagues see lists, casting sheets, producers' phone calls, and there, freedom easily becomes a filter of admission. In the end, the myth of freedom coexisted with a register of exceptions, caveats, and fears. Where does your freedom end if, nearby, there is someone else's surname in the credits? And, finally, the magic of childhood, in which not-so-fairy tale things were hiding. Walt Disney, magic, propaganda shadows. The brightest lights cast the longest shadows. In 1938, Leni Riefenstahl came to the studio shortly after Kristallnacht, a gesture for which Walt Disney was later accused and criticized. To some, it was a business visit, to others, a cold distance from someone else's pain. In 1941, Dumbo put racial caricatures on the screen, which became part of the era's cultural code. In 1946, Song of the South sang nostalgia for a happy South, where melodies lulled a hierarchy. Even inside the Factory of Wonders there was argument. Animators Art Babbitt and Bill Melendez recalled irritation, conflicts, union meetings, how magic collides with shop floor reality. The legend of childhood works simply. It sands off sharp edges so the fairy tale feels safe for everyone. But whose edges are sanded first? If the fairy tale is told to children, who is responsible for its subtext? The author, the studio, the era, or the viewer? We are not rewriting achievements, we are asking about the price of enchantment. The ending is simple and uncomfortable. You look for answers in biographies, you find a question for the system that knows how to smile and look away at the same time. This shadow does not vanish on its own. Memory, critical reading, and a willingness to look beyond the usual frame disperse it, even today. The system that wrote the script. The light and shadow in this story aren't accidental, they're engineered. For decades, the industry chose comfort over equality. Private clubs without Black or Jewish members, white zones on television, scripts where stereotypes passed as proper decorum. Ratings and ad breaks decided who got to laugh, sing, and claim the close-up, and who stayed outside the door. While viewers were shown impeccable heroes, invisible rules were already deciding who could be a hero at all. We're used to hunting for culprits by surname, but the climax here is different. The point is to see not just personalities, but the mechanisms of selection, censorship, fear, and a compliant audience. It's the access timetable, the schedule of silences, the editorial habits that turned exclusion into tradition. Change began not thanks to the myth, but in spite of it. Step by step, voice by voice. Today, the choice is ours again. We decide whom to invite, whose words not to cut, what a safe space will mean, and for whom. Stories don't rewrite themselves. People do, by turning on the house lights and looking at the whole room. Start simply. Name the borders, open the doors, rebuild the guest list. Hear those who weren't called. Whose story would you rewrite today? And from which scene would you begin?